The moving truck was still in the driveway when Elena Ruiz realized her father was holding a set of keys that didn't belong to her. She stood on the sidewalk in front of a house she had never been invited to see, watching her sister press both hands over her mouth, watching her mother wipe tears with the back of her wrist, watching her father, a man who had once told her that money didn't grow on trees, that new shoes were a luxury, that college would have to wait, hand over a small brass key like it weighed nothing at all. $500,000. A 4-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch and a 2-car garage, sitting on a cul-de-sac in the kind of neighborhood Elena had circled on real estate apps at 2 a.m. and then closed out of because dreaming past midnight was free and everything else cost money she didn't have. She hadn't been told. She'd found out because her sister Vanessa posted a video, sunlight pouring through bay windows, captioned, "God is good." Elena had watched it 4 times before she understood what she was looking at. Then she'd driven 90 minutes without telling anyone, and now she was standing on a stranger's lawn that belonged to her baby sister, waiting for someone to explain. Her mother saw her first. The colour left her mother's face the way water leaves a cracked glass, slow and then all at once. Elena, her father's voice, flat. Already defensive, like he'd rehearsed this exact moment and hated that it had come early. This isn't a conversation for right now. When is it a conversation for? Elena's voice didn't shake. She was proud of that later when she replayed it. In the moment, she felt nothing but a strange, cold clarity, like she was watching herself from somewhere just outside her own body. You bought her a house. Vanessa's hand found their mother's arm. Protective, or performing protection. Elena genuinely couldn't tell anymore, and that not knowing was its own kind of grief. Dad. Elena took a step closer. Say it to my face. Tell me why. Her father set his jaw the way he always did before saying something he knew would cut. 46 years old, and Elena still flinched, some small animal part of her bracing the way she had at 11, at 17, at 29. We don't owe you an explanation, he said. We don't owe you anything. 6 words. Elena would hear them for the rest of her life, in the shower, in traffic, in the 3 seconds before sleep took her. But in that moment, standing on a lawn still striped with fresh sod lines, all she could think was, there is a reason, and I am going to find it, even if it takes me apart to do it. Before we go further into what Elena found, and trust me, what came next will change everything you think you understand about this family, hit subscribe, tap that like button, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching this from tonight. Some of you are going to see yourselves in this story. Stay to the end. Elena Ruiz had spent her whole life being the daughter who didn't need anything. That was the story the family told about her, and for a long time she'd told it about herself too. The responsible one. The one who got a partial scholarship to nursing school and covered the rest waiting tables until 1 a.m., who moved into a 600-square-foot apartment at 22 and never once asked her parents for rent money, who sent birthday cards with cash tucked inside, even during the years she was skipping meals to make her own bills. She was proud of that identity. It had cost her everything, and she wore the cost like armor. Vanessa was 3 years younger and had never worn armor in her life, because someone had always been standing in front of her, absorbing the blows first. Growing up, Elena hadn't resented that. Not really. Vanessa was the baby, the golden one, the daughter their mother had almost lost during a difficult pregnancy, and there had always been an unspoken agreement in the house that Vanessa was fragile in a way Elena wasn't allowed to be. When their father lost his factory job the year Elena turned 15, it was Elena who picked up an after-school job at the pharmacy to help with groceries, while 11-year-old Vanessa kept taking dance lessons because she's already been through enough watching us struggle. Elena remembered standing in the kitchen doorway, hearing her mother say those words to a neighbour, and feeling something small and important close itself off inside her chest, like a door being locked from the inside. She didn't blame Vanessa for any of it. Not back then. Vanessa hadn't asked to be protected more. She'd simply been born into a family that had already decided who could bend and who couldn't. But a house. A $500,000 house, paid for outright, no mortgage papers signed at that closing table, according to the Facebook comment from a cousin that Elena couldn't stop rereading. That wasn't protection anymore. That was a number too large to explain away as love spread unevenly. That was a fact that demanded a reason. And Elena's parents didn't have that kind of money. Not on paper. Her father had worked in logistics for the last 18 years, her mother part-time at a dental office. They lived modestly, drove a 12-year-old Camry, complained about property taxes every spring like it was liturgy. There was no version of their finances Elena had ever seen that contained a spare $500,000, which meant the money had come from somewhere else. And nobody was telling her where. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad, the way she used to study for nursing exams, and she wrote down everything she knew, everything she didn't, and a single question underlined 3 times. Where did the money come from? She thought about her grandmother first, her mother's mother, Rosa, who had died 2 years earlier at 83, leaving behind a modest brick house in the old part of town, and, as far as Elena had ever been told, not much else. Mia, you know how your abuela was. She didn't believe in banks. Elena had helped clean out that house herself, had boxed up Rosa's rosaries and her chipped Talavera pottery and her drawers full of yellowed photographs, had cried into a stranger's shoulder, an estate sale worker, because grief has a way of finding whoever's nearest. She remembered there being talk of a small life insurance policy, nothing that could buy a house. Elena wrote her grandmother's name on the legal pad and circled it twice, for reasons she couldn't yet explain to herself. 3 days later, she called her mother. "I need to understand," Elena said, keeping her voice steady, clinical, the way she spoke to frightened patients before a procedure. "Not for drama. I need to understand where that money came from, because it doesn't add up, and you know it doesn't add up." There was a long pause on the line, long enough that Elena checked to see if the call had dropped. "It's complicated," her mother finally said. "Try me. Your grandmother left more than we told you." The words landed like a slow-motion car crash, the kind where you see it coming and still can't stop your body from bracing. "More than you told me," Elena repeated. "How much more?" Another silence. And then quiet, almost ashamed. "There was a trust, Elena. Your grandmother set it up years ago, before she got sick." A trust for who? Her mother didn't answer right away, and in that gap, Elena understood. The way you understand a diagnosis before the doctor finishes the sentence, from the shape of their face alone, that whatever came next was going to break something in her that had already been cracked for a very long time. "For both of you," her mother said. Split evenly, that's what the paperwork said." Elena's hand tightened around the phone. "Then why does Vanessa have a house and I have a rent payment due in 9 days? Her mother's voice cracked. "Because your father and I made a decision. We thought Vanessa needed it more. She and Marcus were drowning, Elena. You didn't know how bad it had gotten. We thought you were stable. We thought you'd understand." "You thought I'd understand," Elena said, and something in her chest went very still and very cold. "That you'd take my inheritance, my grandmother's money, left to me by name, and hand it to my sister without telling me it existed." "It wasn't like that." "Then tell me what it was like, because from where I'm standing you stole from me and called it love." She hung up before her mother could answer. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to set the phone down on the counter, and she stood there in her kitchen staring at nothing, feeling the entire architecture of her family rearrange itself into a shape she didn't recognize. If this story is hitting you somewhere deep right now, if you've ever felt like the family you gave everything to decided, without asking you, that you were the one who could go without, take a second and comment your thoughts below. And if you're feeling this with me, hit that like button. It genuinely helps. For 2 weeks, Elena did nothing. That surprised her most of all, that after a discovery like that, the body simply keeps going. She went to work, she charted vitals, held the hands of dying strangers, drove home in silence, and lay in the dark, turning the words split evenly over and over like a stone she couldn't put down. It was her co-worker, Denise, who finally said the thing Elena hadn't let herself think. They were in the break room, and Elena had told her the bones of it, The house, the trust, the silence, expecting sympathy, maybe outrage on her behalf. Instead, Denise set down her coffee and said, "Have you actually seen the will, or are you just taking your mother's word for what it said?" Elena blinked. No, I haven't seen it." "Then go see it," Denise said. "Because parents lie to keep the peace all the time, baby. Doesn't mean they're lying about the big thing. Sometimes they're lying about a smaller thing to protect the big one." Elena didn't understand what that meant. Not fully, not yet. But something in her went very still and alert, the way it used to when a patient's numbers didn't match their symptoms, and her instincts told her to keep digging before she trusted the chart. She requested a copy of her grandmother's will and trust documents from the county recorder's office the following morning. It took 4 business days to arrive, and when it did, she sat in her car in the parking lot outside the pharmacy. She didn't know why she couldn't wait until she got home, only that she couldn't, and read it start to finish with her hands cold on the steering wheel. The trust existed exactly as her mother described. Rosa Delgado Ruiz had in fact set aside assets, not the modest sum the family believed, but a portfolio that had grown considerably over 2 decades, quietly, the way old women who survived hard decades sometimes do, to be split evenly between her 2 granddaughters upon her death, administered by a trustee until each granddaughter reached the age of 35. Elena had turned 35 14 months ago. Vanessa would turn 35 in November. Elena read that clause 4 times before the meaning fully landed. The car felt very small and very quiet around her. Vanessa wasn't 35 yet, which meant Vanessa's half of the trust hadn't legally released, which meant the $500,000 house hadn't been purchased with Vanessa's inheritance at all. It had been purchased with Elena's. The realization didn't arrive like anger. It arrived like the floor dropping out from under a hospital gurney, sudden, silent, and then a scream that comes a half-second too late. Her parents hadn't split the inheritance unevenly out of some misguided love for her struggling sister. They had taken the only portion of the trust that was legally accessible, Elena's and only Elena's, and given the entire thing to Vanessa, and then told Elena to her face on a stranger's lawn that they didn't owe her anything. She sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. Her manager texted asking if she was coming in. She didn't answer. When Elena finally drove to her parents' house that evening, she didn't call ahead. She didn't want them to have time to build a story around the truth the way they'd built one around the money. Her mother opened the door, and her face did something complicated. Relief, then dread, both at once, like she'd been waiting for this exact knock for weeks and hoping it would never come. "I have the trust documents," Elena said, holding up the folder like evidence at a trial, because in some sense it was. "I know it was my money, not split money, mine. Vanessa's portion doesn't release until November. You used my inheritance to buy her a house, and then you stood on her lawn and told me you didn't owe me anything." Her father appeared behind her mother in the doorway, and for the first time in Elena's memory, he didn't have an answer ready. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Say something," Elena said, and her voice finally broke, the clinical calm she'd been holding for 3 weeks splintering all at once. "Please, just tell me why. I need there to be a reason big enough to make this make sense, because right now, all I have is that you loved her enough to steal for her, and you loved me enough to lie to my face about it." It was her mother who spoke, finally, and what she said was not the reason Elena expected. It was worse and stranger, and it cracked the story open into something none of them had seen coming. "Vanessa doesn't know," her mother whispered. "She thinks the house came from an inheritance her mother-in-law left. Marcus's family. We told her that so she wouldn't ask questions, so she wouldn't know it came from your grandmother at all." Elena felt the ground tilt again. Why would you lie to her too? Her mother's eyes filled, and for the first time Elena saw something underneath the woman's composure that looked less like guilt and more like fear. "Because if Vanessa knew the truth," she said, "she would never forgive us, and neither, I think, would you. Something is about to come apart in this family that none of them saw coming. And it's bigger than a house. If you've made it this far, stay with me, because the next part is where everything you thought you understood gets turned upside down. Like this video if the story's got you feeling something right now, and let me know in the comments, do you think Vanessa really didn't know? The truth, when it finally surfaced in full, took another 2 weeks to arrive, and it arrived not from Elena's parents, who had spent 2 decades perfecting the art of protective silence, but from Marcus, Vanessa's husband, who called Elena directly on a rainy Tuesday night, his voice low, like he was speaking from a closet or a parked car. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to not tell Vanessa I called." Elena sat down slowly on the edge of her bed. "Okay." "The house wasn't a gift," Marcus said. "Not really. Your parents told Vanessa it was, but there's a lien on the deed, a private one held by your father. Vanessa doesn't know that either. She thinks we own it outright." Elena's stomach turned over. "A lien for what?" Marcus exhaled, and when he spoke again, his voice had the flat, exhausted quality of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "6 months ago, I lost almost everything in a business investment. Vanessa doesn't fully know how bad it got. I let her believe it was a rough patch. We were 3 payments behind on our old house, about to lose it, and your parents stepped in. They didn't just buy us a new house, Elena. They bailed us out of a foreclosure and rebuilt the whole picture so Vanessa wouldn't have to know how close we came to losing everything, so she wouldn't panic, so she wouldn't leave me. And they used my money to do it," Elena said quietly, "without asking me, and then lied to both of us so that neither of us would ever compare notes." "I didn't know it was your money," Marcus said, and for the first time his voice cracked. "I swear to you, Elena, I didn't know. I thought it was insurance money from my mother's estate. That's what your dad told me too. I only found out it was your grandmother's trust 3 days ago, when your mother called me in a panic saying you'd requested the documents and we needed to get our story straight before you found out everything." Elena closed her eyes. Somewhere in the house, her downstairs neighbour's television murmured through the floor, an ordinary sound from an ordinary night, while her entire understanding of her family rearranged itself for the second time in a month. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "If they told you to keep quiet?" Marcus was silent for a long moment. "Because I'm tired of lying to my wife," he said. "And because you deserve to know the truth is bigger than a house." "It was never really about you not needing the money, Elena. It was about them being too scared to tell Vanessa the truth about how close her life came to falling apart, and they used your inheritance and your silence as the easiest way to bury it." That night, Elena didn't cry the way she expected to, sat very still at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd made her legal pad list 3 weeks earlier, and she felt something shift inside her that wasn't quite forgiveness and wasn't quite rage. It was clarity. Cold, complete clarity, the kind that comes only after every possible excuse has been stripped away and what's left is simply the shape of the truth. Her parents hadn't chosen Vanessa over her out of love. They had chosen the version of the family that was easiest to manage. Elena, steady and self-sufficient, could absorb a betrayal quietly, the way she'd absorbed every hard thing since she was 15 years old, standing in a kitchen doorway, learning that some children get protected and others get depended on. Vanessa, more fragile in their eyes, though clearly not as fragile as they believed, had to be shielded even from the truth of her own life. And somewhere in the middle of all that careful managing, no one had ever once asked Elena what she needed. She decided, sitting at that table, that the next conversation would not be one where she waited to be given an explanation. It would be the one where she gave them the truth, all of it, in the open, in front of everyone, and let the family survive or shatter on its own terms. We're getting close to the moment this entire story has been building toward, the confrontation that changes everything. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and finally telling the truth, subscribe now, because what happens next is exactly that kind of moment, and you won't want to miss how it unfolds. Elena called a family dinner herself for the first time in her adult life. She chose neutral ground, her own apartment, small as it was, because she wanted her parents sitting in a space that belonged entirely to her, built entirely by her own hands, no trust fund, no bailout, nothing given. She wanted them to remember, at least for one evening, exactly what she had built with what little she'd actually been allowed to keep. Vanessa arrived first, uncertain, hugging her arms across her chest the way she did when she sensed a storm, but couldn't yet see its shape. "Is everything okay? You've been distant." "Sit down," Elena said gently. "I need you to hear something, and I need you to hear it from me before anyone else tries to shape it first." Her parents arrived 20 minutes later. Her father's face was already braced for battle. Her mother's was already wet at the eyes, as though she'd been crying in the car and hadn't stopped in time. Elena laid the folder on the table, the trust documents. Marcus's phone number, though she didn't need to call him. He texted her that afternoon. "Tell her. I should have told her myself months ago. I'm done living inside a lie built to protect me." "Grandma left an inheritance," Elena began, looking only at Vanessa. "Split evenly between us. Mine released when I turned 35, 14 months ago. Yours doesn't release until November." She let that settle before continuing. "Mom and Dad used my half, only my half, because it was the only half that was legally available to buy your house, not because they thought I didn't need it, because it was the only money they could touch without waiting." Vanessa's face went through several expressions at once: confusion, disbelief, a flicker of something that looked for just a moment like hope that this was some kind of misunderstanding. "That's not. Marcus's mom left us that house, his inheritance." "Marcus's mother didn't leave you anything," Elena said, as gently as the words allowed. "You were 3 payments from losing your last house. Marcus's investment collapsed. Mom and Dad stepped in to save you, and they built a story so you'd never have to know how close you came to losing everything, and so you'd never have to know it came from money that was supposed to be mine." The silence that followed had a texture to it, thick and physical, the kind of silence that exists only in the half-second after a bone breaks and before the pain arrives. "Is that true?" Vanessa turned to their mother, her voice small in a way Elena hadn't heard since they were children. "Is any of that true?" Their mother didn't answer with words. She simply put her face in her hands and began to cry. Not the composed, careful tears she'd shed on the lawn weeks earlier, but something raw and unguarded. The sound of a woman who had spent 2 decades building a family out of careful omissions and had just watched the whole structure come down at once. Their father stood. For a moment, Elena thought he might walk out, the way he always had when a conversation demanded more honesty than he could offer. Instead, he sat back down, slowly, like something in him had finally given out. "We were scared," he said, and his voice for the first time in Elena's life didn't sound like a wall, it sounded like a man. "Vanessa's marriage was falling apart in front of us, and we didn't know how to save it without also saving face for both of them. And you." He looked at Elena, and something in his expression cracked open. "You never once, in your entire life, asked us for anything. We told ourselves that meant you didn't need anything. We told ourselves that so many times we started believing it. We were wrong. We were wrong about all of it." "You didn't just choose her over me," Elena said quietly. "You built an entire family on the idea that some of us can bleed quietly and some of us can't. And you never once asked me if I agreed to bleed." Vanessa was crying now too, and when she reached across the table, she didn't reach for their parents. She reached for Elena's hand. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear to you, Elena, I didn't know any of this. If I had known it was your inheritance, I never would have let them." Her voice broke. "You've spent our whole lives making sure I never had to feel the hard parts, and I let you because it was easier. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I let it be easier." Here's where the story turns, because what happens between these 2 sisters next is the real heart of everything unfold. If this has moved you even a little, drop a comment and let me know your honest thoughts, and like the video if you're still with me. We're almost to the end. What came after wasn't a clean resolution, because real families rarely get clean resolutions, no matter how satisfying that might be to watch unfold. But it was, in its own uneven way, a turning point. Vanessa insisted, over her parents' protests, on having the trust re-examined by an actual estate attorney. Not to punish anyone, she said, but because if this family is going to survive, it has to survive on the truth, not on who can carry the most without complaining. The attorney confirmed everything Elena had already pieced together. The money used for the house had, in fact, come entirely from Elena's released portion of the trust. Legally, morally, however you wanted to weigh it, it had been hers. Vanessa refused to simply keep the house as though nothing had happened. She and Marcus took out an actual mortgage on the property, modest, manageable, the kind of debt that comes with dignity attached, and used the loan to reimburse Elena directly for what had been taken. It wasn't the full $500,000, not right away, and Elena told her sister more than once that she didn't need to do it all at once, that she wasn't trying to bankrupt her family to make a point. But Vanessa insisted on a real repayment plan, drawn up formally, witnessed by the same attorney, because, as she put it through tears the night they signed it, "I don't want a house that was built on you disappearing. I want to know that every wall in that place I actually earned." Their parents didn't fully repair overnight, and Elena didn't pretend they had. Trust, once you've watched it get spent behind your back, doesn't rebuild itself just because the truth finally arrived. But her father started calling her every Sunday, small check-ins that had never existed before, awkward at first, tentative, like a man relearning a language he'd never bothered to speak. Her mother, in the months that followed, began doing something Elena had genuinely never witnessed in 46 years. She started asking Elena what she needed, instead of assuming the answer was nothing. It was Vanessa, though, who changed the most, and in some ways that surprised Elena more than anything else in this entire story. The sister who had spent a lifetime being protected began showing up in ways she never had before, driving 3 hours on her day off just to help Elena repaint her apartment, calling to check in not because something was wrong, but simply because she wanted to hear Elena's voice, sending a card on a random Tuesday that said nothing more than "thank you for finally making us tell the truth." I needed it more than I knew. Elena kept that card in the drawer of her kitchen table, the same table where she'd once sat alone at midnight with a legal pad and a single underlined question. She still thought, sometimes, about the version of herself who had stood on that stranger's lawn hearing her father say, "We don't owe you anything." And she understood now that he had been wrong in a way that went deeper than money. Every family owes its children the truth. Not comfort, not protection from every hard thing, but the truth, plainly spoken, even when it costs something to say out loud. She had spent her whole life being the daughter who didn't need anything, because that was the story her family found easiest to tell. But needing nothing had never actually been true. She had simply learned very young that asking rarely got her anything back, so she stopped asking and mistook the silence that followed for strength. It wasn't strength. It was just the loudest kind of quiet. Before we close this story out, I want you to sit with that for a second, because so many of you watching tonight have spent your whole lives being the one who didn't need anything, when really you just learned that no one was going to give it to you if you asked. If that's you, subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and comment the biggest lesson this story taught you. I read every single one. Months later, Elena stood in Vanessa's kitchen, the same house, the same bay windows that had once framed a video captioned, "God is good," watching sunlight fall differently now that she understood every wall it touched. Vanessa was chopping vegetables at the counter, humming something off-key, and their mother was setting the table for a dinner that, for the first time in years, no one had to brace for. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never knowing any of it?" Vanessa asked, not looking up from the cutting board. "If you hadn't driven out here that day, if you just let it go?" Elena thought about that question longer than Vanessa probably expected. "I think about it all the time," she admitted, "but I think the truth was always going to come out eventually. Some things don't stay buried. They just wait for someone brave enough or angry enough to start digging." Vanessa finally looked up, her eyes soft. "Which one were you, brave or angry?" Elena considered the woman she'd been on that lawn. hollowed out, disbelieving, holding a folder of legal documents like a shield, and the woman she'd become since, who had learned finally at 46 years old that love without honesty isn't love at all. It's just a story people agree not to question until the day someone finally does. Both, Elena said. I think you have to be a little bit of both to ever find out the truth in a family that's built on keeping quiet. If you've stayed with this story until the very end, thank you for being here, genuinely. Subscribe if this story moved you. Share it with someone who's ever felt like the family they gave everything to decided they could go without. And tell me in the comments, what's the biggest lesson you're walking away with tonight? Some of the best conversations on this channel happen right there in the comment section, and I read every word. Until the next story, take care of the people who tell you the truth, and don't be afraid to become someone who tells it too.